Hi friends, Eric again here talking about the video game things that I've been making and doing because someone needs to know. I cannot always talk to my, the garbage cans outside about the video games that I'm making. They get pretty bored and also very terrible. I mean, in a sense they're about as useful in a conversation as doing a YouTube video because, well, you get about the same amount of responses. Anyway, talking about video games, wow. So Witcher 7, it's still the Steam summer sale. So the game is still slightly cheaper than it normally is, which is a good motivation possibly for people to buy it, which would be cool. You can then also write a positive Steam review, in case you enjoyed the game. I mean, you can do it anyway, but I assume it'll be weird if someone hates the game and then writes a positive Steam review. That would be strange. Anyway, I'm at 6 reviews now, 4 more, and I can be slightly less desperate. That would be nice. I don't like being desperate about review counts. It's kind of like running after a bus that you're about to miss. It's very undignified, and I'm in my 40s. At some point there should be a base level of dignity I'd rather not go under. But who knows? Who knows really what the world holds for all of us? So yeah, that's the stand of the what's the deal there. Aside from the reviews, I'm fairly happy with the game, with how it's going, and apparently people seem to have a good time with it. From again what I can see, and that's good enough in a lot of ways. So let's talk about the fun stuff anyway. JRPG game. Wow. As I was building this presentation, I realized did I do all of this week? And apparently I didn't really feel like it. For some reason. I don't really know why. Maybe because most of the week was way too warm. And now it's slightly colder outside, but my building doesn't care because it is warm now and will make everything inside of it warm. But anyway, we made 2 secret enemies. Basically an extension of the types of enemies that fuck up your day have now variations to them for very specific reasons. And I found that one of them is an enemy I think I mentioned. The other one is just silly. And yeah, I did those. I made new items because, and I think I mentioned this last week, I kind of started to run out of basic things to do, setting up systems and setting up other things. So I kind of had to sit down and think, okay, what kind of items do I want to have, or want to at least have the player start with? How do I do chests or item pickups in the game, and all of that stuff. So I had to make items. Then I had to make chests. Then I had to think about character progression, which isn't that important for this idea for this one playable dungeon, because, well, there isn't really a need for anyone to level up really. But I still had to or at least for me, I wanted to start building something out, and at least wanted to put some stuff in place of the more unconventional ideas that I had and wanted to try out, because that's the reason you built this prototype thing, because, well, you can see how well it might work in the hands of other people, and can then make adjustments or ditch ideas, or you can see it for yourself very often. It's at least, again, for me, once I'm playing with something and then can see how it works over a period of time, I can and I can see on myself how much I actually engage with something, and like have like I'm interested in engaging with something, I can kind of like guess, okay, how well is the system working, at least to some degree. There are now checkpoint resting agent. That's another part. Like previously, it didn't really exist. There was like a thing in the test dungeon where you like stepped on it and it healed you. There's now a bit more stuff involved with it. A lot of these ideas also came from when I built the new items and the chests, and then I realized, wait a second, there's maybe a way for me to make something where you can replenish your items in the dungeon. And then I started thinking about, okay, what about like different types of rests? And I think I mentioned this in a like much earlier video already. And yeah, and then like yesterday, mostly today, I like started to think about, okay, what like the actual dungeon, what like I have to make a video game now, which is a whole like different kind of problem in a way. But yeah, so let's go through things. This will be long enough anyway, so let's try and be long about the things that are actually interesting. So like the very big observation I had again is just like at the beginning of this week when I built the new enemies, and then I built the items, and then I built again another set of moves. When I made the progression system, and also when I built the checkpoint system, because well, that you will see maybe why. I realized how quickly I can add new moves and new actions to this game because of how I set everything up like last month. I like when I made the items, I think I created like 10 different items or something. I can probably reduce it in general, like for like a final game in some way or another, but like I basically created 10 different moves that did specific things, and I finished that entire like block of work in a day or less than a day. Obviously it doesn't have any like real graphics attached to it, and there's like a lot of like the larger visual polish stuff that doesn't exist at all right now. So if you like were to assume I would like create a new, like assume this is like a commercial game and this needs to be polished up and has like a bit more visual stuff attached to it than just like a red square that appears with a text and then a number pops up, like, and it needs a particle effect or something and sound effects. Obviously that increases the amount of time, but the basic I have an idea for an action that I want either like a character, like a player character to do, or an enemy to do, or like an item I want players to find and use, to, oh, it's in the game and it's working and it can test the functionality and I can play around with it and see how it interacts with the rest of the game, is incredibly short, which is just very nice in terms of creating variety, right? I can very quickly just like create a very broad like spectrum, and I already have a fairly broad spectrum of stuff that like enemies can do and players can do, and how this all kind of interact with one another. So there's already a lot of I can like basically create a lot of like broad stuff, or like go very wide very quickly, which just in terms of like the thought of like, okay, now like again building a larger game and having like expanding the scope of something just makes this for me like easier, and also it's exciting, right? Because right now it's in a state where I can have an idea for a move and have it in the game within like a few minutes, because it's just like a few text boxes in a spreadsheet, and then having the like, and then attaching it to like the objects that like translate the spreadsheet stuff into something that happens in the game and like affects stuff in the game, and that is very quickly and very safe. There isn't like every single move in the end, and how it's handled is so like still so compartmentalized at the end that like there isn't really a lot of like space for things to kind of like break, at least on that level, which is cool because like again I'm thinking about like the way I did action game stuff. It was always a pain, for example, to like think about projectiles and how they behave, and then have the projectiles behave not the way you wanted them to behave, but also having it all basically work from like a central like object that you then manipulate was also terrible, because sometimes you wanted a projectile to like be very different than the rest. At the same time, I'm pretty sure like and that's like another problem, and this is like something I noticed today on something else I made, is like another reason why maybe this project like is much easier to handle for me is because I do not have to I don't carry around like, I don't know, over half a decade of old code with me that I have to interact with. And instead I can sit down and build something up from scratch and plan ahead and like have better knowledge than I had way back when I build like something else. Like one of the reasons why, for example, like dealing with enemy behavior and spreadsheet like and projectors and whatever in like my action games was always terrible, is because it was like all over the place. Everything was all over the place because that's how I built these things initially, because I had no better idea. Now that I can like that I know the value of having things simple in the way of like pulling data from like a central place and like making sure that there's like a unified way of how you address that data and manipulate it and like draw from it and like basically shuffle it around to the places where they need to be. And also in general like understanding how you need to set these things up so that they work reliably, and don't make the same silly mistakes again that then require you to have like 1,000 conditionals to make something do just like one thing fairly reliably. Is good. And like everything works much nicer, at least for now. Like who knows how this all looks like again would potentially look like if it's big. But like with the way it's set up right now, I think it'll be okay. But we'll see. Maybe I will regret everything I just said here. But yeah, the other part that was interesting, like when I built this, is that I then realized when I set up the spreadsheet and with the way everything is situated, and also because the items also are drawn from the same spreadsheet as enemy attacks, I created something that has like a thing that just says, okay, this is how like the game will show it, like display it to the player in case it's an item and is in someone's inventory. And because I have like this vague idea of like, what if there's like an ability or way for players to turn enemy attacks into items they can use? So every move in the game has basically an inventory like text that gets displayed, which I then then attach to like the game's dialogue engine. And now the game can display, like when an enemy performs an attack, it shows the name of the attack. Or like when you open up a chest, it shows what kind of stuff you had in there. So this also was then very easy, partially in a way because the move spreadsheet is just like kind of like a derivation of like the dialogue engine. Because, well, with the dialogue engine, I first learned how to like basically pull data from external sources, and then I thought, why reinvent everything when I can just like use this and like build it from there, which now weirdly enough gives me better ideas on how to like fix the dialogue engine in some parts where it's like fairly like working not well. The dialogue engine is like, I think it's called the Gossip engine or something. It's like a dialogue handling system for GameMaker that I got out of itch.io, and like I think a few weeks after I bought it, the developer made an updated version for it, which they sold separately, and I never bothered contacting them to get the updated version. It's a whole thing. But also, like, at this point, because I was so fed up with a lot of this stuff, like, already in Witcher 7, I, like, changed so much in it. and at this point especially. But anyway, it's interfacing now. The secret enemy stuff also, again, like it taught me that because I needed these enemies to do very specific things, it then made me realize that, like, made me basically build a system for them first, where I can better, like, direct which moves they're gonna perform, which then made me understand that, hey, I could do that for, like, some of the regular enemies as well to make them a bit less like arbitrary in their behavior, and that was cool. So again, you learn something when you build these things, and I'm also, like, so deeply excited about these enemies. It's so weird. I think, again, it's something I think I mentioned last week. I'm so excited about when I built this. What really amuses me the most is when I make the enemies that are evil to the player, and like realizing, oh, wait a second, here's something that where a player could like, basically every time I think about something, ooh, what if the player is just doing too much of this? For example, I think last week, this is like one of the enemies that I did, because I realized that like during last week's video where I mentioned, oh, what if, like, oh, you can perform moves that put you into inventory debt. Inventory debt is the idea that, like, okay, you have say you have a potion in your inventory, and you have, like, you start the dungeon with 3 potions, and then you use all of your potions up, and then an enemy steals an item from you and steals a potion, even though you have 0 potions. Well, you now have -1 potions. I put it in there mostly because I thought it's funny, and I found the idea interesting. Then I, like, created, like, a special move for a player character that also kind of, like, removes an item from your inventory, which then, as I did the test dungeon, made me realize, wait a second, you can, like, inventory depth is in that sense very interesting, because it kind of, like, gives the player an option to, like, push further into a dungeon even though their resources have run out. But then I realized, wait a second, what's to prevent players from just, like, getting into, like, infinite inventory debt? And that gave me the idea, oh, that could be an enemy that's called a debt collector that, like, that will show up if you have too much inventory debt, and will, like, the attack that the debt collector has is called debt collection, which it takes whatever, like, takes a random inventory slot that is an inventory debt, and, like, deals damage to you according to the amount of debt that was in that slot, and it's most likely going to kill a character, and then it runs away. And then I realized, wait a second, because one thing I want to do for character progression, or, like, for reward for, like, fighting encounters, is you get resource points that you can spend to, like, replenish your like, items in a dungeon, or, for example, balance out your inventory debt. However, then I had the idea, okay, what if, like, what's the player, like, what will happen if a player would just, like, keep grinding out enemies, and in general, like, just, like, how to deal with grinding, or how to deal with, like, players just, like, repeatedly murdering, like, 5 encounters, resetting them, murdering 5 encounters, resetting them. How to deal with that? Basically, I keep thinking about ways, every time I think about, or, like, realize, wait a second, there's a potential for players to just excessively do one specific thing and, like, repeat it over and over again to gain an advantage. Like, again, defeating enemies to, like, I don't know, get 1 million resource points that they can spend. What if, again, the moment you are too excessive, like, in that direction, a different type of enemy shows up that does something awful to you, or, like, potentially. Again, what I want to do there is also, like, to, especially as the game goes on, for, like, these aspects to be less severe to the player. But at first, again, it's like this push and pull, like, put it in my actual, like, domino board, like, building the game around encouraging, rewarding, and punishing hubris. Like, this push and pull between like really like rewarding the players for like thinking they're stronger than they actually are, or like believing that they're the strongest thing out there at all, and like taking stupid risks, while also occasionally punishing them for it, because well, it's part of like reaching beyond your means is also like and like it's only like basically trying something you know you're probably too weak for, and succeeding at it is only really fun and interesting if like the game usually just like hits you over the head and tells you no, you shouldn't be doing that, because otherwise you just realize, wait a second, there's nothing preventing me from just like doing everything. So you kind of like, again, the breaking of the game has to work in every direction. Like if the players are able to break the game should be able to break the player. But it also shouldn't prevent the player from breaking the game. It should also just say, yeah, like, sure, do it, but, you know, make sure that you run away when you see me or something, or like don't go completely overboard. But yeah, stuff to think about. Not really important right now, but this is what happens occasionally when I just sit somewhere and like try to work on something, and then I realize, oh, wait a second, what if I were to do this in the full game? Well, the full game doesn't really exist yet at all, but like sometimes it's nice to dream. Anyway, checkpoint resting. I mean, I mentioned some of these already. So they're like, what I wanted to do here is like to have like two different types. Like you have like a short rest and a long rest. And again, for me, this was mostly like, it's mostly there on one hand to encourage like a specific decision-making process, but also to kind of like make a difference or create a difference between different types of safety within, like when you're not in town, or like when you're in a dungeon, like and similar things, as opposed to, oh yeah, you can, like again, the Final Fantasy thing, oh, if you have a tent, you can rest at a checkpoint and replenish your HP, or otherwise you can just save your game. It's kind of similar to that, but like I want this to be a bit more involved. Like one thing I think about in that regard is like how in Dragon's Dogma 2 you can rest at campfires and consume a food item that then like gives you specific like boons in some way or another, and it always, for me, it always felt nice to do these longer rests, because it felt like you're like kind of like reached like a breaking point in your journey, and also you're kind of preparing for what you're about to do next, for like the next part of it. So I wanted there to be like a stronger difference between, oh, you just replenish your HP, and you're actually trying to prepare yourself for what's about to come next. So this is why there's like a short rest and a long rest. The short rest is just like, okay, your HP have refilled, but also encounters aren't reset. So again, I want the dungeon to be built in such a way that the regular encounters are like visible on the dungeon map, so you can like walk into you have to like specifically walk into an encounter to trigger it. Again, the special encounters, for example, the debt collector, will work like a regular random encounter, where like each step there will be at some point be a check. Like if you fulfill the conditions for a debt collector to show up, that checks, okay, do you get the encounter or not? Outside of that, they're visible. You can walk into them, you can fight them. However, they will not respawn unless you completely leave the dungeon, or like that's the plan, or you like do a long rest at a checkpoint. It's again a bit of a like imagine you have Dark Souls, but you have to perform a very specific bonfire resting action to reset the encounters, instead of like the encounters always resetting when you rest at a bonfire. The long rest, like to talk about the next thing, and like both of these rests will consume resource points, the same resource that you can also use to like replenish used items, and that you will, like, that's the plan at least right now, that you will get from defeating enemies. The important thing, or like the difficult thing here, I think, will be to balance out the amount of points you get from defeating enemies towards and the amount of points you need to perform rest actions. Long rests, weirdly enough, is basically a battle without enemies and different actions, because yesterday when I was like sitting down, I was thinking, okay, I have to make a long rest menu, and I have to do the graphical interface again. I have to like make sure that like everything is attached correctly, and then I realized I could just like treat it like a battle, use basically the same thing that like does like the action tracking in the battle, but just like have it work without enemies and have it perform different actions when you press buttons. And now a long rest is a battle, which then again, once again, made me realize when you say everything can be a battle in a JRPG, that means everything can be a battle in a JRPG, even resting in a camp. So that's what it is right now. That also means that at least some of the long rest actions are part of the big action spreadsheet, which in theory could be accessed via other means. So, for example, this treat wounds action that you can perform, which removes like one of the permanent or like more permanent status effects that you might get when a character dies in battle, that can be removed on a long rest, or if you somehow get access to that move via other means inside of a battle. Same goes with the talk action. So like, and again, I want these longer rests to also feel different in that the characters actually have a moment of quiet and are not like in a like moment of high tension. So I want that to be like, and the talk action, and again, because there's already like a helping system and there's a bond system, so each character like shares, like two characters share like a bond with one another, and like the more they interact with one another, the more like that thing goes up and the more effective it is, and whatever other funny consequence you might think about of this might arise from these kinds of systems. There's also like like the option to have like two characters talk with each other, which right now just like increases that like bond XP tracker by a larger degree. But again, there's like space for you to then attach like specific scenes to that, or like specific conversations between characters and all that kind of stuff. And the last one there is like the replenish action, which is what I already said, is like just a way for you to like spend access resource points that you might have to like get more items that you've already have. This is kind of important, or like the part here is important. This isn't a store. So what I want to do here, and again, like for me, it's very important to like make a very clear distinction between you are in town and you are in a dungeon, or like outside of town. And certain things are not accessible to you and are not possible for you. For example, you set the items that you take with you into a dungeon while you're in town, but unless you find an item while you're out exploring, you're not like, for example, doing a replenish action to get a potion when you didn't already have potions in your inventory at the beginning of the dungeon is not possible. However, if you had them, you could replenish them. That's kind of like the idea here. And you could also like balance out your inventory depth if you have access points. So that's the whole idea here behind all of that. Yeah, and like long rests also replenish HP, but they do also reset encounters. So like after a long rest, the encounters, whoever might have been, whatever you might have cleared already, are back to existing again. Also to kind of like, again, to also create a bit of a moment of tension between, do I want to take a short rest or do I want to take a longer rest with the risk of having to deal with the encounters again. Another thing that's in here right now, who knows if it'll be there at the end, you can only reset a checkpoint once. After that, in order to reset it, you either need to leave the dungeon or reach a different checkpoint. So to like kind of avoid something where like players go forward, kind of like get stuck in a point and go back to like a checkpoint previously to reset things and then move on. I kind of like what I want. Again, what I want is for both for players to move forward and to always be like to come in situations where their resources are gonna be strained. If you have something where like basically you can like infinitely return to a checkpoint to like, for example, replenish your HP or like whatever, that's kind of like, for me, this doesn't feel interesting. Like the really interesting moments in these types of games really come from getting pushed towards like the limits of the resources that you have. Because these are also the moments where usually you're then forced to engage more with the more nuanced elements of like the battle system. So like basically get every like ounce of like of like an advantage during a battle instead of like just powering through because whatever, you can just heal everything all the time. So this is kind of like a again, who knows how it will look at the end, but that's like at least right now the idea I want to pursue in that other one. And for the character progression, let's just like go into the other domino board because it's like I already put a lot of stuff there. It's again everything very broad, but let's just go through like what I thought about how to like what I want a character or like a progression system to be. And how I want to build my systems, or like why I want to build them in the way I want to build them, and what the drawbacks might be from like other approaches, even though it's not that clear cut. So like also like when the way what I'm describing here is like doesn't mean that like, oh, a leveling system is just like boring and bad or whatever. It's not. It's more like just me wanting again. I think a lot about it, like when I build system, I think a lot about what these systems then express like through their actions, and whether or not like these systems like and how I could use them to kind of like express specific things a bit more or a bit clearer or like in some way or another. So this is like why I always end up like being like weird about stuff. But yeah, so what I put down is like character progression should mean character progression and not just stat progression. That means that, again, the stats that are gained should reflect how the character develops through a game. No epic story ever has a part in it that says, and now the heroes spent a year murdering tenacious eggs in a cave which magically taught them a spell of apocalyptic proportions. I then realized there are training montages in some like parts of media, right? Like there are like, I mean, Dragon Ball has or had this a lot. Who knows what the most recent stuff is? Never watched it, but you know, the thing where like Goku runs around in like high gravity for like a year or something and then is super strong. Yeah, sure. That happens. So in a way, that is sort of like murdering eggs in a cave for a year. But in an RPG, that is rarely framed as such. It is rarely framed that like the party arrives at like a cave where like a weird sage lives who then says, okay, go over there and beat up that egg for like a year. It's very hard to hit, but gives you a lot of XP. It's rarely framed like that. It's kind of like abstractly framed like that, and in a way, XP in general is just like a very, very large abstraction of like the minutia of like getting better at something, obviously. But for me, what's like mostly, or like what I mostly want to have is like what I said is that the progression of a character should also like reflect the progression of the character, or like the development of the character through the game or through the story. So like the moves they learn, the actions they perform, the things they are good at, the things they are less good at, and how this potentially changes over time, should say something about who that person is and how they interact with the world. and again, this is something you occasionally have, because you have like this detachment between gaining strength and who the character is. In like a lot of RPGs in general, you have these moments where a character can have like spells that obliterate the world, but be displayed in the game story as like someone who's deeply insecure and incompetent, which again can be interesting, but like that discrepancy would need to be addressed in some way, and it rarely is. At least in what I know. Again, there are always exceptions to everything, but for me, again, this is like me trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to have to do these things? How do I want to build these systems to have something where there is progression in there? There are like things that you do that over time will improve the character's ability to do things, and like give them more means to like overcome challenges. But what these things are should in some way, and what you get from them should in some way reflect a specific type of development in that. And I don't want these parts to be that abstract. I want these parts to be like fairly descriptive in a way, and fairly like set. And yeah, I want the characters to grow into their powers and understanding of the world. How they get there has at least partially be specific to who they are. So like again, like one character gets strength through like one mean, and different character like might get there through other means, right? Again, the to go back to like beating up X in a cave, maybe this method works for one specific character because like their whole way of like interfacing with the world functions like that. However, imagine you're a scholar. You do not get you don't get much smarter by beating up X in a cave. I didn't get my academic degree like by hunting monsters, and you wouldn't really get one, right? Because to get an academic degree, you have to like read things and research things and understand like connections between things, and like get a systemic understanding of like whatever your research subject is, and like have to think in a very specific way about the world and what is being said about the world, and like how you can formulate like theories and hypotheses, and how you can test these, and like what that means, and all that other kind of stuff. But you don't really get that kind of like understanding if you just fight things somewhere. Usually, again, there are worlds and there are like stories where this somehow happens. I guess in a weird moment of stress, you could come to that realization, but like usually that's not like how things go. And so in a way, this is like me just like trying to build something where like one character gets like learns things. Like characters learn things in a way that should reflect how they interact with the world, because that's like a huge part of like what this game is about, in a way that each character has a very specific way of interacting and interfacing with the world and enacting their will, so to speak, on the world, and how it then reflects back on them. And so the way they learn things and the way they change as characters should reflect these things as well. But yeah, like, so what this ended up is right now there's like basically there are like three like pillars like or XP tracks. There's one that's just a general, okay, you like killed enough things and like you did enough things and like did enough quests or whatever. Your XP has reached a specific level. Your stats have increased. You do a little bit more damage. You are a bit more likely to hit things. Your defense is a bit better. The like second track that exists is the special move track. That's like the thing that is very specific. That's the thing where like you have to do specific things to unlock moves. They're like different things I was working through here, but like right now, each special move you learn is attached or like has a specific set of like hidden goals that you need to hit. You can learn about these goals and you can discover them so that you can kind of like more like directly like try and learn specific actions. But these are just there, and these are just things that you need to do, and like these moves or like the goals that you have to like hit reflect the type of move that you're gonna do. For example, like one of the characters will learn a move that gives their turn, where they give their turn to a character who's already done something. They learn that move via, like, one of the conditions is they have to hit an enemy and deal no damage a few times. They have to help other characters a few times more, and they have to like perform a move like on a very specific enemy where it's incredibly useless. And these, like, fulfilling these goals is kind of like meant as like, oh, and this then leads to the realization, a specific realization that, oh, maybe sometimes I just there isn't really much more for me that I can do than just tell someone else, hey, go do something instead. Which, and this is like the basic idea, and all of these moves are kind of like that, or like the idea at least is to be like that. And yeah, and the bond tracks then reflect the relationship between party members. So again, this is like another like XP thing. Another thing, like, I have no idea how well this is even visible in the video. I hope people can read this. I only see this small in the OBS window. Like, maybe I should. Yeah, it was like a bit small. I'm sorry. So yeah, something I put down here. This is like, I never really played Apocalypse World, but Apocalypse World is like a very, very influential like indie tabletop game. I don't even know when it was originally made. It was like probably way over 10 years ago. But the creators of it, D. Vincent Baker, I think that's. I always like when I first learned about the name, I was. It always. No, it was. Yeah. Now I'm confused again about the name, because I always get confused about the name. Anyway, oh yeah, I always thought it was called Devens and Baker, so it's two people. It is two people, but it's a couple both with Baker. But I always thought it was like two people, one Devens and the other one Baker, but it's D. Vincent Baker. Anyway, as like I hope if I can remember, I'll put a link in the description. Has a series of like posts about like designing Apocalypse World, and then I read which I read a little bit of it. Then I bought the book to read the rules, and like one thing that comes up fairly often, and it's something even though I played a lot of like games that are inspired by Apocalypse World, doesn't really show up in there. But like it's this sentence of like descriptive means prescriptive. So when you put something in the game, like things in an Apocalypse World game or like a game inspired by it, don't exist just for narrative reasons. Narrative reasons or things that exist because of the narrative also have consequences in terms of like the stats and the rules and like what you can do. Like these are like always connected to one another. Now this is like one of the things that I want to try to like in some way or another always have in my mind while I'm making this game, because this was like one of the very early ideas or like thoughts I had, was like getting this kind of like idea of fictional positioning and fictional possibility space, and reflecting that mechanically or like on an interactive level into like a computer role-playing game, like specifically in a JRPG, because I think you can do this much better in a JRPG than if you like were to do like on a like overall tactical map or whatever, because JRPGs are very abstract. So you can do a lot of stuff with just changing a word around, or like 2 words around, and like have it just framed differently, because you don't need to display a lot of things. So that was like one of the reasons. It was like the very big stuff, or like what drove me to like making this very first prototype, or like these very first ideas back in December. And this is like where I go back to this again. Like if I the way I describe a character should also be reflected in the way this character interacts with the world, and with and in the way this character changes and develops over time. Again, if a character like develops certain traits, or like makes certain experiences, that should also reflect the way, or should also be reflected in the way they interact, like in moments of tension, or like in battles, and like in other moments. There should be like a very close connection between these two, because this is like, again, this is for me, this is where like the really interesting stuff happens. And like, and again, like for me, it's also about like, okay, and how can I build the systems in such a way that like this works in every direction, so that it's not just like, if you take an example, for example, from Final Fantasy IV, where Cecil is a Dark Knight and at some point becomes a Paladin, and gets thrown back to level 1 and cannot use his the items he had before and whatever. That's like a moment where like the character changes in the game, but it's not like, but it's like a plot point. You reach a certain point and then he becomes a Paladin, and that happens, but the rest of the game doesn't really work like that, or rarely works like that. But building a system from like from its foundation in such a way that it supports these kinds of developments, and supports these kinds of like things that like, where like each character has these moments, is important, obviously. And like what's important for me, like while I'm talking about this, me saying all these things doesn't mean that like games who did that only a little bit in the past, or didn't even like bother with it at all in the past, are somehow bad and less innovative or whatever, and I'm like the big expert of. No, like everyone and every game and every like all of these are built like with specific intentions, like constraints in mind, and like people are very often like built around like specific things that help them more do the things that they are interested in. So it's like, it's very important for me to say, I'm not going around saying, oh, like Final Fantasy was bad because it only had an experience system or whatever. No, that's not that's not what I'm on here. It's more like me trying to understand why, for example, why an XP system alone would not work for what I want to do. Maybe this is like the better way, instead of like rambling for 50 minutes. Who knows? And here like more thoughts, but like this is like mostly like me, that like the danger obviously is that if you like split this off too much, is that how do you make sure that people don't end up being under-leveled, for example, or over-leveled, or for example, if you say, okay, you have to learn moves by like fulfilling specific conditions, what would then prevent players from like learning the strongest moves right at the beginning? I mean, first of all, who cares? In one way or another, like for example, even if like a level 1 mage would learn like the strongest spell in the game right at the start, usually they don't have the resources to cast it, so who cares if they have it? The other part is like define strongest move in the game. The game that's in the way it's built right now, it's like, who knows what that even is? I mean, there's a move that's called strongest attack in the world, but you cannot really learn that one. I mean, you can, but yeah, it's weird. Yeah, but also there are like different ways how you can do this. But right now, my idea is like to have these things just like open from the start, but like unknown, and the progression part, or like the direction part in the progression system in a way comes from having certain things be known to the players earlier than others, which however again means that like if they stumble upon something, now well then they stumble upon it, and I think that should be okay. But also, who cares? This is we are in. I have to make a dungeon now, and not I have to make a, I don't know, 10-hour RPG or like some other thing. Anyway, let's go back to this thing. Because, well, God, 50 minutes and I'm at dungeon building. Anyway, dungeon building. So I did all of this until yesterday, and then I realized, oh shit, I'm now actually out of things I can set up. There's like, again, there's always stuff you can set up, but it's at some point you need to like face the reality and tell yourself, okay, you have to build a level and you have to see how everything works. Again, in a way, I already had that in that just fight 30 encounters in a row system, but there's a difference between that and like, because the goal is to have something playable, and playable also means to have a dungeon, to have like floors that you transition between. You have a space, you have like a narrative that's somehow embedded in all of that. And again, like if I build all of these systems where like, oh yeah, like character progression has to like reflect the development of the character, or like narratively and all that. Like I wouldn't be thinking about all of this stuff like so much if I wouldn't like also be interested in like a narrative thing. So like that, like you cannot really tell a narrative if you have a corridor with 30 enemies in there. So like that's like also part of like the something playable. It also has to have a narrative and it has to reflect that. So that's all big and scary and difficult. So my problem with that is that like the moment I hit something where I'm not so sure about like how to progress, and it's the same with like that, like was one of the things that kept Virtuous Heaven from ever being finished, is that I then get lost in small things, like that I add more like visual flourishes or like ancillary things that aren't really that important right now, but like keep me busy, and keep me from like having to face like making decisions about important things, and these kinds of stuff. So like for example today I fiddled around with like how the players and the enemies are placed during the battle, or like when the text boxes show up and like when the menu is displayed and other things. I did also build something where like players can transition between different areas on a map without getting stuck in things they are not supposed to get stuck in, all these kinds of things. So like it wasn't a complete waste of a day, and even that wasn't really a waste of a day. It was just like not the most important thing I could have done. But like one of the reasons I ended up in there is because, well, the question of like, okay, what do you want to build, and how do you want this to look like, and what's the narrative, and all these kind of things aren't really all that clear to me right now, and I'm a bit scared to like make these things, basically to put things in place, because then I cannot change them easily. I have an idea for a narrative, and an idea for how to frame specific things. Like one thing I like want to mention, is something I mentioned like offhandedly a little bit last week, is like something that just happens with the way everything is set up here, is that very often it is more it's fairly effective for a player character to hit another character with a like status effect attack, because that status effect gives them like makes them more effective against a specific enemy, and that's a bit weird. Like again, if you think about this as like in the descriptive equals prescriptive thing, if like a system allows you to do that, and if the system then also encourages this type of behavior of sort of like inter-party hostility in some way or another, you need to address it and you need to frame it in some way or another, because otherwise it just like, again, you cannot run around and say, oh yeah, descriptive equals prescriptive, and you like narrative and like systemic stuff and stats like are not separate from another, and then just like not bother with something because it makes you uncomfortable to think about like how you could potentially frame this. also you kind of have to like think about these things, because otherwise you might end up risking like unintentionally framing these things in a way that that you might not like. Because if you think about it, this is a fairly sensitive thing, right? You have a group of people that are like working towards a common goal, that share a common goal, but one part of their interaction is performing attacks to one another. Now the game kind of like, again, what I'm saying here is saying in general is like everything can be a battle, everything is an attack. So like in a way, even like a potion is an attack, sure. I mean, you can see it like that, but like it depends on like the intention that you have and the effect that you have. That's one part of it all. The other part is also just like thinking about like it could still be like a very like you could express like things between these characters that are like not very like hostile in some way or another, or like even abusive. Like if one character keeps hitting another character, right, to make them do something better. That's like if you're not careful with that, it can be read and like probably should be read as abusive, unless there's like a very specific context with that. So that's like something where I'm like sitting here and like thinking I have an idea of like how I want to address and frame this, that it makes it clear like why these characters do the things and like engage in battles in the way they are engaging in. But this is still something where like on one hand I'm deeply insecure about anything related to any kind of story that I've ever written. So that's one thing. I just don't trust my judgment with anything, especially the moment it involves people interacting with one another. The other part I have like that like keeps getting me into problems, and it's something I kept having problems with Virtua 7, even though that game has like a completely different approach to like what the narrative even means in that game. But still, one big problem I have is that I think about like, okay, I could frame it like this, and then I like go on a walk and I think about like hypothetical scenarios where like potentially, ooh, this could be bad, or like what if it's like this, or like what if that happens, or what if there's like an encounter with like this character that didn't exist until that one very moment or whatever. And I just get lost in like eventualities and like potential like places where like this could like not work, just not work at all, or like could be ambivalent. And like the other thing here is like that like then my brain usually frames narrative ambivalence as bad. Like no, it has to be clear, it has to be like it has to be pure in that sense. Like someone can't have like a position about something and have it be not applicable in every situation, right? No, the interesting stuff that happens is like, what if it is occasionally gets into like weird ambivalent moments where your own idea, or like the character's idea of like how the world works and how they justify the way they interact with the world gets into conflict with reality, right? And then, well, how are you dealing with that part then? So ambivalence isn't always like terrible in these things, but like I go down these paths and think, oh god, there's like ambivalence, I don't want to go there. So like let's think about menus a little bit more or whatever. So that's like one big thing. And like the weird part here is like this is just like, again, something that like should be able to be completed between like 15 and 30 minutes. That's like, it's not like a big thing. It's not like a big game with I don't know, a cast of like 15 to 20 characters and like I don't know how many big moments and like character arcs and developments and like acts and something. This is just like a short moment where like something happens and like people explore space and like run into something and have to deal with a problem. I do not have to like have an answer for everything right at this moment. And I don't really need to have it, but still this is like something I get hung up on. Also because, and again, this is like a big problem I have with a lot of things. The moment the task in front of me is unclear is like the moment where like I start to wander around. And the moment I start to wander around is like when just like nothing gets done. So I like, and this is like another aspect of it all, because well, the path forward to like, okay, how do you want to even build the dungeon and all of this is not very clear. So this is like why I think spend a day thinking about the narrative framing of something that might potentially happen like 10 hours into like a game that might never exist. So that's like something where like having basically creating like existing things and material things that you can like then deal with the problem, then address the problem, because then you really now know what these problems might actually be instead of like everything being hypothetical. So that's like a big issue why I kind of like got lost the last few days, and like it very much had to do with like, for example, I didn't even know or had no idea like how I want to handle dungeons. Like, did I want them to be like several like different rooms like in Game Maker speak, which are like separate entities, or like do I want to have like them basically a dungeon have like exist on like one shared map where I teleport the player around? I ended up with picking that option because it would, for example, would make tracking specific dungeon specific things much easier, because I can just like constrain them to this specific like space and like don't have to worry about like carrying over variables between like rooms and stuff like that, which is always annoying. So that's like one thing that wasn't really clear. I haven't really thought about like graphics, for example. This is like still something that I keep pushing down the line, because I really don't want to get like held up by it, but it's still something at some point that I need to address. At least now I know, okay, like everything is going to be on one big map. I will teleport the player around. It is possible that the player can teleport around and nothing breaks. That's cool. And now I have to think about, okay, what size of does the space need to have? Like my idea is like to have like on the critical path to have like between 15 and 25 encounters, and then have the other encounters spread out on like alternative paths. I do have like the ability to put down chests in the dungeon that have items or like additional resources. Right now there won't be any equipment because I have no idea what to do for equipment. Who knows, maybe that changes later on. I could then add that as well, but like for me right now it's just like getting this basic thing done. And in that process of like understanding, okay, this is how much space I need, I can then also understand, okay, this is how I could then like incorporate the narrative stuff of it. I have some ideas of like the narrative stuff that needs to be there in some way or another, but like there's a lot of like, there's specific things where like who knows if there's even the space in the dungeon to do that, and like without it fucking up the pacing of it all. So yeah, there's like a lot of like whatever, but still the idea now for me is to like actually build a space. I want to have a space to where this stuff happens next week. It doesn't have to be perfect. I just want it to exist, and I want to at least then see what I have, and who knows, maybe I even have like a better idea about like how the narrative framing works here and all that kind of stuff, because that's, again, I don't want this to be even like this all stuff, don't want this to be like the big thing, but it has to be like in some way, it has to exist, and like it has to be like confronted in some way or another, because otherwise it like I wouldn't feel good about it. but yeah, you have to. These are all things you have to deal with when you like build an RPG and build a game where like you specifically say that like the narrative framing is reflected in the interaction, or like reflected in the systems. Yeah. Anyway, this has been going on for way too long. So I'm gonna stop now. Have a good weekend. See you next week. And buy Virtuous Heaven if you haven't already. That would be like awesome. And write positive reviews. All of you would be cool. Would be nice to have 10 so that I don't have to worry that much about it anymore. Anyway, goodbye everyone.